to see you. Thanks for being here today. So happy. Always. Oh, I love it. Good morning. Good morning. Come on down. Got 3 minutes to go. Okay. Good morning. Good to see you. Good morning. How are you? Thanks for being here. Yeah. Hello. Good morning. Good morning. Thanks for being with us. Good morning. Mark, good to see you.
Yeah.
How are you?
Good to be seen.
Yeah.
Better than view. Yeah.
Better than what?
Better than view.
Yes, okay.
Sorry I missed your presentation.
It's all right. Okay.
Got a couple of crazy kind of parts.
No, everything.
I won't bore you. It's getting better.
Okay. Fine. I hope so.
Yep.
All right. Hi, Reverend J. Wolin. Ken. Nice to see you. Thanks for being here today. Hi. Good to see you again. Yeah. Oh, that's right. That's right. Yeah. Thanks for the remembrance.
1, 2, 3. Testing. 1, 2, 3.
Thank you. Not fully yet, but it'll get there. It'll get there. I have faith. Hi, good morning. How are you? Good to see you. What? No. I'm talking about Purim, so, which will mean I have to talk about, Israel also, which I'll just wade gently into those ones. Ooh, 10:29. Okay. Somebody ring the bell. Ring the bells that can be rung. Wow. Good morning. Good morning. Good morning. Hey, Nancy. Good morning. Good morning. I see you're wearing green though today also. Oh, still got a minute to go. Okay. Interesting. A lighter crowd than usual. Seems like it. We're late arriving. Well, we do have a lot. We do have an hour of training going on. Okay. 9, 8, 7, 6. Can we put the TV on in the back? 4, 2, 1. Blast off! Let's rise in body and or spirit for our opening hymn, number 1026, of Every Woman in the World.
Mo.
Alrighty. So I'm Reverend J. Wolin, the settled minister here at the Unitarian Universalists of Sarasota. We especially want to welcome our visitors here today, both in person as well as online. We invite our visitors to participate in any of the programs that we have here at the UU, and you can find that out in many different ways, but we do encourage you, if you want to register on our virtual Facebook, which you can find on our website, uusrq.org. And if you're here in person, you can sign up at the welcome desk right outside the sanctuary. And if you do sign up, you will get, not a prize, but our weekly newsletter, and as well as some Zoom links. And the newsletter is one way to find out about many of the events that are happening here, as well as our website and our Facebook page. We invite you as well always for coffee and conversation after the service. We look forward to getting to know each other. There are a couple of special announcements. We have a new art exhibit opening in the Lexow wing. We're very fortunate to have the exhibition of work by Alan Mestel, a photojournalist, documentary photographer, and filmmaker. He has dedicated thousands of hours shooting human rights and social justice organizations, which have been published in major newspapers and featured on CNN, NBC, PBS, and Frontline. So please join us for this Portrait Ukraine exhibition in the Lexow wing following the service. Also, after the service, there will be a congregational conversation in the Reeb Room about our mission and vision, or anything else that you would like to ask the minister. And then online at 2 o'clock, we will have a budget town hall for you to learn about the budget that you will be voting on next week at our annual meeting. So next week, last announcement, is our annual meeting right after the service, where we will vote on our budget, our new board of directors, and our mission and vision. And so, without further ado, it is always my pleasure to introduce Synia Carroll and her wonderful voice and music.
When you walk through a storm, hold your head up high and don't be afraid of the dark. At the end of the storm, there's a golden sky and the sweet silver song of a Walk on through the wind, walk on through the rain, for your dreams be tossed and blown. Walk on with hope in your heart, and you'll never walk alone. You never walk alone. Walk on with hope in your heart, and you'll never walk alone. You'll never walk
Our opening words today are from the poet David Whyte, entitled Courage. Courage is the measure of our heartfelt participation in life, with another, with a community, a work, a future. To be courageous is not necessarily to go anywhere or do anything, except to make conscious those things we already feel deeply, and then to live through the unending vulnerabilities of those consequences. To be courageous is to seat our feelings deeply in our body and in the world, to live up to and into the necessities of relationships that often already exist, with things we find we already care deeply about, with a person, a future, a possibility in society, with an unknown that begs us on and always has begged us on. To be courageous is to stay close to the way that we are made. And so now, as we light the chalice, please join me in affirming the sixth principle of Unitarian Universalism. The goal of world community with peace, liberty, and justice for all. And so now, surprise, I am not Catherine Bonner. So Catherine, unfortunately, has a fever and is ill this morning. And so I quickly scrambled and adapted, which is the way we do. So I'd like to share a story with you entitled Enemy Pie. It should have been a perfect summer, but it wasn't. It was all good until Jeremy Ross moved into the neighborhood, right next door to my best friend Stanley. I did not like Jeremy Ross. He laughed at me when he struck me out in the baseball game. He had a party on his trampoline and he didn't invite me. Well, Jeremy Ross was the one and only person I had on my enemies list. I never even had an enemies list before until he moved into the neighborhood. But as soon as he came along, I needed one. I hung it up in my tree house where Jeremy Ross was not allowed to go. Now, Dad, he understood stuff like enemies. He told me that when he was my age, he had enemies too. But he knew a way to get rid of them. He said, enemy pie, he said. And you may be wondering, what exactly is enemy pie? I was wondering too. But Dad said the recipe was so secret that he couldn't even tell me. But I will tell you this, he said. Enemy pie is the fastest known way to get rid of an enemy. And so I went out to play alone, and all the while I listened to the sound of my dad chopping, chop, 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 and stirring and blending, blah, 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 and all the ingredients of the enemy pie. I didn't know what the blending sound would be. Anyway. But when I was in the backyard looking for ladybugs, I smelled something really, really good. And as far as I could tell, it was coming from our kitchen. I was a bit confused. And so I went to ask Dad what was wrong. Enemy pie shouldn't smell this good. But Dad was smart. If enemy pie smelled bad, your enemy would never eat it, he said. So I could tell he'd made enemy pie before. While the pie cooled, he filled me in on my job. He talked quietly. There's one part of the enemy pie that I can't do. In order for it to work, you need to spend a day with your enemy. Even worse, you have to make nice to him. It's not easy, but that's the only way that enemy pie can work. So, are you sure you want to go through with this? Of course I was. Yes, absolutely. All I had to do was spend one day with Jeremy Ross, and then he'd be out of my hair for the rest of my life. So I rode my bike to his house and knocked on his door, and when Jeremy opened the door, he seemed surprised. He stood on the other side of the screen door and just kind of looked at me, waiting for me to say something. And so I was pretty nervous. I just said, "Can you play?" And so we rode our bikes for a while, played on the trampoline. Then we made some water balloons and threw them at the neighbor kids, which that didn't sound so nice, but we missed. Jeremy's mom made us lunch, and after lunch, we went over to my house. It was strange, but I kind of liked having fun with my enemy. He almost seemed nice, can I say. But of course, I couldn't tell Dad that, since he'd worked so hard to make the enemy pie, and Jeremy knew how to throw a boomerang also, so he threw it and it came right back to him. So then he gave it to me, and I threw it, and, well, it went on my house and into my backyard. Well, when we climbed over the fence to find it, the first thing that Jeremy saw was my treehouse. And he said, "Can we go in it?" And I knew he was going to ask me that. I knew it. But he was the top person, the only person on my enemies list that I had posted in the treehouse. And enemies aren't allowed in the treehouse. But he did teach me how to throw a boomerang, right? And, and he did have me over for lunch. He did let me play on his trampoline. So I guess, okay. But hold on a second. Let me go up there first. And so I climbed up ahead of him, tore the enemy's list off the wall, had a checkerboard and some cards in the tree house. And we played games until my dad called us down for dinner. My dad made us macaroni and cheese for dinner, my favorite. And just as an aside, whenever I was responsible for dinner when my children were young, I made that almost every night, to the point where they hate me now for that. Hate mac and cheese, won't eat it at all. But they seemed to like it then, and it was easy to make, I'll just say that. Anyway, but it was Jeremy's favorite too. Maybe Jeremy Ross wasn't so bad after all. And I was beginning to think that maybe we should just forget about the enemy pie. But sure enough, after Dad brought out the pie, I watched as he cut the pie into 8 slices. And Dad, I said, it sure is nice having a new friend in the neighborhood, trying to get his attention there, trying to tell him that Jeremy Ross was no longer my enemy. But Dad only smiled and nodded, and I think he thought I was pretending or something. And so Dad dished up 3 plates of pie, side by side, with big pieces of pie and giant scoops of ice cream. Passed one to me and one to Jeremy. Wow, Jeremy said, looking at the pie. My dad never makes pies like this. It was this point that I panicked. I didn't want Jeremy to eat the enemy pie. He was my friend. I couldn't let him eat it. Jeremy, don't eat the pie. Don't eat it. It's bad pie. I think it's poisonous or something. And Jeremy's fork stopped before reaching his mouth. I was like, oh, thank God. Right? But he crumpled his eyebrows and looked at me funny. I felt relieved. I thought I had saved his life. I was a hero. If it's so bad, Jeremy asked, then why has your dad already eaten half of his? I turned to look at my dad. Sure enough, he was eating the enemy pie. Good stuff, he mumbled through a mouthful, and that was all he said. And I sat there watching them eat enemy pie for a few seconds. Dad was laughing, Jeremy was happily eating, and neither of them was losing any hair. It seemed safe enough, so I took a tiny taste. Enemy pie was delicious. After dessert, Jeremy rode his bike home, but not before inviting me over to play on his trampoline in the morning. He said he'd teach me how to flip. And as for enemy pie, I still don't know how to make it. I still wonder if enemies really do hate it, or if their hair falls out, or if their breath turns bad. But I don't know if I'll ever get an answer, because I just lost my best enemy. And so let that be a reminder to us as a way when we have differences is to get to know the other person and befriend them, and they will no longer be our enemy. The end. And so now I invite the children, if that, yeah, thank you. I invite the children and youth, if they like, to go to the back, and our teachers will take you out for class. It's up to you. And now, once again, Synia Carroll.
Love is my passion, love is my friend, love's universal, love never ends. Then why am I faced with so much anger, so much pain? Why should I hide? Why should I be ashamed? Time's much too short to be living somebody else's life. I walk with dignity, I step with pride, 'cause I ain't moving from my race, from my face, from my history. I ain't moving from my love, my peaceful dove means too much to me. Loving self can be so hard, honesty can be demanding. Learn to love yourself. It's a great, great feeling when you're down, baby. I will set you free. I will be your remedy. I will be your tree. A wise man is clever, seldom ever speaks a word. Foolish man keeps talking, never is he heard. 'Cause I ain't moving from my face, from my race, from my history. I ain't moving from my love, my peaceful dove means too much to me. Loving self can be so hard, honesty can be demanding. Learn to love yourself. It's a great, great feeling. Time's too lonely without words. Future voices needs to be heard. Gabriels are always older than the beard. Mama said be brave, there's nothing to fear. Ooh. Time's much too short to be living somebody else's life. I walk with dignity, I step with pride, 'cause I ain't moving from my face, from my race, from my history. I ain't moving from my love, my peaceful dove means too much to me. Loving self can be so hard, honesty can be demanding. Learn to find concern. It's a great, great feeling. Learn to love yourself. It's a great, great feeling. Learn to love yourself. It's a great, great feeling.
Our next reading is Where the Mind is Without Fear by Rabindranath Tagore. Where the mind is without fear and the head is held high, where knowledge is free, where the world has not been broken up into fragments by narrow domestic walls, where words come out from the depth of truth, where tireless striving stretches its arms towards perfection, where the clear stream of reason has not lost its way into the dreary desert sand of dead habit, where the mind is led forward by thee into the ever-widening thought and action, into that heaven of freedom. Let my country awake. So please, as we go into a time of silence, let us think about those things that we fear and how we can let them go. Okay, so every 3 or 4 times a year, we like to recognize our new members and a little ceremony to recognize our new members. So I invite our new members to come up and be recognized.
Now is the time during the service that we honor our newest members and their decision to join UUs of Sarasota. We encourage you to share with us your creative thoughts, your vital experiences of life, your doubts and your dreams about what life and our lives together can be.
It is a joy to welcome each of you as a member into our community. Becoming a member of the UU of Sarasota is an important step, but it is only a first step. I encourage you to grow your religious life and to explore and share your unique gifts. Will you journey together with us, sharing the joys and responsibilities of membership? If you agree, please say yes.
Members of the Unitarian Universalists of Sarasota, will you reach out to these people in friendship, including them in our activities? Will you walk with them on their religious journey? Will you be open to their unique gifts and perspectives? Will you extend a warm welcome to each of them, remembering that each of us was once a new member?
Oh, can we have the screen?
There's an answer?
There is an answer. There we go. Yes. Thank you. Ours is a shared ministry to help each other find meaning in life and to build a just and compassionate life and world. Working to fulfill the mission of the Unitarian Universalists of Sarasota. Let's give all our new members an applause, a round of applause. Thank you, thank you. Now, as I said, ours is a shared ministry. And this includes sharing some of your money as we take our offering for the work of the UUs of Sarasota. Please be as generous as you can. If you're online, you can go to a link in the YouTube page, or if you're here or have a cell phone, the QR code as well goes to our donation button. Thank you for your generosity and all your spirit. Let the sacred time begin. Our next reading is from Ralph Waldo Emerson. Knowledge is the antidote to fear. Knowledge, use, and reason with its higher aids, the child is as much in danger from a staircase or a fire grate or a bathtub or a cat as the soldier from a cannon or an ambush. Each surmounts the fear as fast as they precisely understand the perils and learns the means of resistance. Each is liable to panic, which is exactly the terror of ignorance, surrendered to the imagination. Knowledge is the encourager, knowledge that takes fear out of the heart. They can conquer who believe they can. It is one who has done the deed once who does not shrink from attempting it again. The sailor loses fear as fast as they acquire command of sails and spars and steam. And now, once more, Synia Carroll.
When I was growing up, my sister and I in North Philadelphia, we did folk music with our guitars. I was kind of weird, but I love it. And this is a song by Phil Oakes. I don't know, you guys know him? Yeah. What a voice, what a man, and what a purpose to his music. So I was introduced to protest music a long time ago. Yeah. Show me the prison. Show me the jail. Show me the prisoner whose life has gone stale. And I'll show you a young man with so many reasons why. And there but for fortune go you or go I. Show me the alley and show me the train. Show me a homeless man who sleeps out in the rain. And I'll show you a young man with so many, many reasons why. There but for fortune go you or go I. Oh, show me the whiskey, oh, stains on the floor. Show me a drunk man or woman as they stumble on out of the door. And I'll show you a young man with so many reasons why. And there but for fortune go you or go I. Think about this. Show me a country where the bombs had to fall. Show me the ruins of the buildings that once stood so tall. And I'll show you young men with so many reasons why. Oh, they're but for fortune. Go you, go I, go you or I. Go you, go I, go you, or I.
So today I want to share the story of the book of Esther from the Hebrew Scriptures, which is directly tied to the Jewish holiday of Purim, which is starting next week. The story of Esther holds very fond memories for me as a child raised in Judaism every year as part of the Friday night service, which was usually a very staid, at least from the eyes of a child, a very boring affair. You know, they would have a Purim pageant where people would dress up in costumes and we would retell the story of Esther. We'd have these loud noisemakers, and it was a lot of fun, not our typical Friday night service. So the quick overview of the story is that the king is looking for a new queen, and he chooses Esther, who is Jewish, although the king does not know this. Separately, part of the story, Esther's uncle Mordecai, a wise and very religious Jew, foils a plot to overthrow the king. And then in yet a separate incident, he refuses to bow down to the king's right-hand man, Haman the Agagite. And because of this, Haman plots to exterminate all the Jews in the land. And it's very interesting to think about this looking back, when we were always told whenever the name Haman was spoken in the service, we were to boo loudly. And I think about even how that was inculcating hate, even at that time, as a little child, just being indoctrinated into hating your enemy. And Esther, despite her fear of being killed by the king just for asking a presence with him, and as well for exposing herself as a Jew, Esther finds the courage to confront the king and persuades him to cancel the edict to kill the Jews. And then the king gives an order to kill Haman and all his family as well. So there are many interesting parts to this scripture. First, as an aside, it is the only book in the Hebrew Scriptures that does not mention God even once. Most academics agree it is not a historical book as much as a novella to explain the celebration of the holiday Purim. But as I studied the story, I realized that the story I was told as a child was incomplete. And, you know, that happens with storytelling, even sermons sometimes. There isn't always enough time to tell the whole story in detail. For those who remember Paul Harvey's radio show, at the end he would say, "And now you know the rest of the story." Well, the story of Esther has more recently been promoted as a feminist story of how Esther saved the Jews. However, I also want to remember another feminist part of the story at the beginning of the story, which I was never told as a young child, which is why the king was looking for a new queen in the first place. And it says the king and his entourage were having a drunk fest. And it states this literally in chapter 1, verse 7, I quote, "Royal wine was served in abundance, and the rule for the drinking was no restrictions." So this drinking went on for a week, according to the story. So I understand maybe why they didn't want to tell me this part of it as a child. After a week of drinking, the king called for Queen Vashti to come and walk naked among all his guests. And she refused. Now, her outcome in this story is uncertain. She is, at the very least, banished from the kingdom, but more likely she was killed. And when we talk about banning books and inappropriate sexual references, I think this story is just one more example of why the Bible would be the #1 banned books there. To me, Vashti, though, is also a feminist hero of the story. Knowing her eventual negative outcome, she invokes her will and refuses to allow a man to control her actions and her body. And although it is entitled the Book of Esther, we should never forget Vashti. Specifically remembering and recognizing March as Women's History Month and the ongoing need for us to hold up a light to our culture that still objectifies women. Vashti is a character that says, "No, I will not accept this." And the book of Esther is also the story about Esther, of course, who overcomes fear, accepts her destiny, risks everything, and ultimately saves her people. Esther faces real danger in confronting the king. As it says in chapter 3, verse 11, "If any person, man or woman, enters the king's presence without having been summoned, there is but one law for them, that they be put to death." Esther says, "If I am to perish, I shall perish." And so, although not summoned, went to the king and spoke her truth. So I ask you to think about what would move you to speak to power, to fight injustice, not only for yourself, but for others. And secondly, I ask you what to think about a time when you felt powerless and someone else spoke up for you and your concerns. And lastly, think of a time you felt silenced in the face of power. What gives one the courage to speak up and risk all? Perhaps this story can give you the courage to speak up, a reminder that sometimes you have to risk all to right a wrong or to bring a light to injustice. And although too complex to tell the whole story now, Esther uses guile, cunning, and her sexuality to invoke her will and obtain the hoped-for outcome to save her people. And throughout her ordeal, though, she is still subject to the whims of men. Famous women's suffragist Unitarian Elizabeth Cady Stanton wrote in 1898, "Women as queenly, as noble, as self-sacrificing as was Esther, and self-respecting and brave as was Vashti, are hampered in their creative office by the unjust statutes of men." It is not man's boasted superiority of intellect through which the eternally working divine power will perfect the human race, but the receptiveness and the love of women, end quote. So on the one hand, the story of Esther is the story of a minority in a foreign land being oppressed. It seems like a clear-cut story of good and evil as it was told, but nothing is ever really clear-cut. For this story is also the story of an ancient blood feud between the Hebrews and the Amalekites, going back to the very beginnings of the Bible. And at the end of the book of Esther, the Hebrews were given permission to slaughter Haman's family and their followers, who were descendants of the Amalekites. And it seems 2,500 years later, that blood feud continues on. Different names, maybe, but it's the same blood feud. It seems inappropriate to tell this story of Esther and not talk about what is happening in the Middle East today. I admit I've hesitated to bring this conversation into our sacred place and time. A few months back, I did do a forum on the Arab-Palestinian-Israeli conflict, and there is not enough time today to go into the details of what brought us to where we are today. Where we are today is excessive suffering. To talk about this, we do need to hold contradictory truths in our minds at the same time. And it is complex and contextual, but that should not prevent us from dealing with the complexity. You have two groups of people who are both indigenous to the land, who both want to be able to have self-determination over the same land. Another truth is that both groups, over their history, have been subject to trauma of removal from their land, oppression from colonial forces, and the real existential threat to their existence. And this impacts their decisions and how they interact with each other. Instead of sharing this piece of land, you have two people whose leaders do not seem to want peace. Leaders who want to continue this cycle of violence for their own political ends. Now, I admit, as an American Jew, I was raised to be fiercely supportive of Israel. It was considered to be a place of last refuge if this country, like many countries before it, expelled or worse, tried to exterminate us. And I hear the whispers of this when the white nationalists chanted, "Jews will not replace us," in Charlottesville in 2017, and the shootings at the Tree of Life in Pittsburgh by a right-wing extremist. And I hear this again when progressives chant, "From the river to the sea," which Jewish people hear as a call for the destruction of the state of Israel and the death of Jews, and as well as we see the harassment of Jewish students on college campuses. And we also have to see, and this has happened since 2001, really the sheltering of Muslims in this country who are constantly under threat of Islamophobia, being killed just for who they are in this country. And this, again, both anti-Jewishness and Islamophobia both exist, and we cannot ignore it. But thinking this way would be living my life based on my worst fears and not acting on my values. I recently had a colleague say to me that they are making sure their passport is up to date in case they have to leave the country. And I wrote them asking them to stay and fight. And it made me think, like Esther, what am I fighting for? What are the values that I am fighting for? And first and foremost, I am fighting for the liberties in our Constitution, the liberty of free speech, free assembly, freedom of privacy, including bodily autonomy, and the freedom to practice the religion of my choice. And that religion is Unitarian Universalism. And so I look to our principles for guidance. Our principles call for justice, equity, and compassion in human relations. And that includes Israelis and Palestinians. Our principles call for peace, liberty, and justice for all. And that includes Israelis and Palestinians. Our new proposed values call us to work, to be a diverse, multicultural, beloved community where all thrive. And that includes both Israelis and Palestinians. You know, we recently held a program here where we had an organization called Roots, which brings together Palestinians and Jews from the West Bank together to foster a grassroots movement of understanding, nonviolence, and transformation. So a Jewish rabbi and a Palestinian shared their stories of how they perceived their histories and how they, particularly in the land on the West Bank. And what was really fascinating, what they both said, was that until they joined this group, Roots, their lives were so segregated that Jews did not know Palestinians and Palestinians did not know Jews. And I'm just going to say it's easy to hate someone when you do not know them. And conversely, it's harder to hate someone who you know personally. Sort of like the story this morning of making a friend out of an enemy. What saddened, and I admit even angered me that night, was when the Palestinian told his story, some Jewish members in attendance not only got up and left, but some started shouting at him. To the credit of others, they stayed for up to an hour after the event ended, talking with the Palestinian to better understand his point of view. We need to build the capacity to listen. We need to build the capacity to empathize with our fellow human being. We need to build our capacity to recognize that every person has the right to flourish with inherent dignity and worthiness. There is enough blame and enough pain to go around. And there is enough land to be shared. Anything has to be better than the wholesale destruction, death, and desecration that we have seen this past year. Or we will, if nothing changes, we will be telling the same story 2,000 years from now. It is time for there to be a ceasefire in Israel. It is time for the hostages to be released. It is time for the prisoners to be freed. It is time to give peace a chance. It is time to listen to each other. Native American Chief Dan George said, "What you do not know you will fear, and what one fears one destroys." And so I invite you to come together with others in our community, in the larger community, people from other religions, other backgrounds, other cultures, to share with each other our stories, our fears, our hopes, our dreams. And by doing so, we will start to break down the barriers and break the cycle of fear and hate and otherness. Ours is a religion built on free religious thought. Let us build our world that way as well. We, through our actions, with our voices, can build the world that we dream about. May it be so. I invite you to rise in body and or spirit for our closing hymn, Shalom Havarim. We'll do it once in Hebrew, once in English, and then third time in Hebrew. but we'll try again next time. Our closing words today are from the Israeli poet Yehuda Amiche, "The Place Where We Are Right." From the place where we are right, flowers will never grow in the spring. The place where we are right is hard and trampled like a yard. But doubts and loves dig up the world like a mole, a plow, and a whisper will be heard in the place where the ruined house once stood. Please join me in extinguishing the chalice. We extinguish its flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the fire of commitment. These we carry in our hearts until we are together again. Thank you all for your presence here today. Go forth and be good.